Sometimes, the phone call you don't want to answer is the one that will haunt you forever. Pastor Emmanuel Adebayo was adjusting his crisp white collar when his Nokia phone buzzed against the wooden pulpit. The sound echoed through the packed auditorium of Victory Chapel, where over 3,000 people had gathered for the final night of the Fire and Glory revival. The smell of anointing oil mixed with the evening breeze that swept through the open windows. Women in colorful jelly head wraps fanned themselves with church bulletins, while men in their Sunday best wiped sweat from their foreheads with handkerchiefs. The air was thick with expectation and fervent prayers. Emmanuel glanced at the phone screen. Sister Patience, his younger sister calling from their village in Osun State. His chest tightened. Patience never called during service hours. She knew better. Let it ring, he whispered to himself, his heart already racing. God's work comes first. But the phone buzzed again and again. Elder Johnson, the church treasurer, noticed the pastor's distraction. Sir, should I? No, he cut him off, silencing the phone. We have souls to save tonight. 3 days of this revival, and tonight is when the breakthrough comes. I can feel it in my spirit. The congregation was already on their feet, singing, "What a mighty God we serve," in both English and Yoruba. Their voices rose like thunder, shaking the very foundation of the building. Children danced in the aisles while their mothers clapped and swayed to the rhythm. Emmanuel had worked 18 months to organize this revival. He had invited Prophet Isaiah Olumide, the famous man of God whose ministry had filled stadiums across West Africa. This was Emmanuel's chance to put Victory Chapel on the map, to prove that a village boy from Osun State could build something great for God. His phone buzzed once more. This time it was a text message from Patience. "Mama is very sick. Please come home. The doctor says..." Emmanuel's hands trembled as he read the first few words, but he quickly locked the phone screen. The message would have to wait. He had been preparing his sermon for weeks. When God calls, will you answer? It was going to be the sermon that would launch his ministry to the next level. As he stepped up to the microphone, the crowd erupted in applause. But something felt different tonight. The familiar warmth he usually felt when preaching was replaced by a cold knot in his stomach. "My beloved congregation," he began, his voice booming through the speakers. "Tonight, God has a word for someone in this place." The revival service stretched past midnight, but Emmanuel felt every second drag like hours. Each time he saw someone check their phone, his mind wandered to Patience's message. What had the doctor said? How sick was Mama? But surely it can't be that serious, he told himself, as he prayed for a woman with a chronic cough. Mama has been strong all her life. She survived raising 5 children alone after Papa died. She can handle whatever this is. Prophet Isaiah Olumide took the microphone, his gold-rimmed glasses catching the stage lights. "I sense someone in this auditorium is being tested tonight," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of decades in ministry. "God is asking you to choose between the comfortable and the calling, between the familiar and the faithful."
Emmanuel's collar felt tighter around his neck. Was this a word for him? The prophet's eyes seemed to find Emmanuel in the crowd. "Some of you think family comes before ministry, but remember, Jesus said, 'Let the dead bury their own dead.' When God calls, everything else must wait." The congregation erupted in amen and "preach it." Emmanuel found himself nodding along, but his phone tucked deep in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. After the service, as church members gathered around to pray and fellowship, Emmanuel finally stepped outside into the cool Lagos night air. The smell of suya from nearby street vendors mixed with the exhaust fumes from downfall buses racing down the busy road. His hands shook as he retrieved his phone. 7 missed calls from Patience, 3 from his brother Tunde, 1 from Dr. Adeleye, their family doctor back home. The text messages told a story he wasn't ready to read. Emmanuel, Mama collapsed during evening prayers. We are at the general hospital. The doctor says her blood pressure is very high. She keeps asking for you. Brother, please call. It's getting serious. Emmanuel, where are you? Mama can barely speak, but she whispers your name. Emmanuel's vision blurred. His mother, Mama Comfort, had been the anchor of their family since Papa's death 15 years ago. She sold tomatoes and pepper in the village market to pay for Emmanuel's seminary education. She fasted and prayed for him every Friday, asking God to use her son mightily. He dialed Patience's number with trembling fingers. Emmanuel, Patience's voice was hoarse from crying. Where have you been? I've been calling for hours. I was in service. The revival. Revival? Patience's voice cracked. Your mother is dying, and you're worried about revival? The words hit Emmanuel like a slap. She's not dying. Don't say that. What did the doctor say exactly? High blood pressure led to a stroke. Emmanuel, she can't move her right side. She can barely speak, but when she does, she calls your name. She wants to see you. If you're touched by this story, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful African folk tales that teach us about life, family, and the choices that define us. Emmanuel closed his eyes, seeing his mother's face, the way she looked when he left for Lagos 2 years ago. Pride shining in her dark eyes as she pressed his favorite meal of pounded yam and egusi into her hands for the journey. I will come after tomorrow's closing service, he said. Prophet Isaiah is preaching about. After tomorrow? Patience's scream pierced through the phone. Emmanuel, the doctor says she might not make it through the night. The line went quiet except for the sound of Patience sobbing. Emmanuel stared at the church building, where the lights were still on and people were still praying. This was his moment. This revival could launch his ministry to international levels. People had come from all over Nigeria to attend. Emmanuel, listen to me, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Mama is a prayer warrior. She's strong. She'll hold on until I get there. I just need one more day. Emmanuel. He hung up the phone and turned it off completely.
The next morning arrived grey and heavy, as if the sky itself was mourning. Emmanuel had barely slept, tossing and turning in his small apartment behind the church. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his mother's face, not as the frail woman in a hospital bed, but as the fierce, loving woman who had sacrificed everything for her children. He remembered the day he told her God had called him to ministry. She was kneeling in their small backyard garden, pulling weeds from around her paper plants. Her hands, rough from years of hard work, had stopped moving as she looked up at him. My son, she had said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. If God has called you, then you must answer. But remember, God is love, and love always finds a way to care for family. Now, as Emmanuel prepared for the final day of the revival, those words echoed in his mind like thunder. Sister Grace, the church's head usher, knocked on his office door. She was an elderly woman who had known Emmanuel since he first arrived in Lagos, and she had a way of seeing straight through people. Pastor, she said, settling into the chair across from his desk, you look like a man carrying the weight of the world. Emmanuel forced a smile. Just excitement about tonight's service, Sister Grace. This revival would change everything for our church. Sister Grace studied his face with the intensity of a mother examining a sick child. And how is your own mother, Pastor? It's been a while since you mentioned her. The question hit Emmanuel like cold water. She's fine. Strong as always. Is she? Because you have the look of someone who received bad news. I've seen that look before on my son's face when he was trying to choose between his family and his ambitions. Emmanuel's hands clenched into fists under his desk. Sister Grace, with all due respect, Some things are between a man and God. True, but God never asks us to abandon love in pursuit of service. Even Jesus made sure his mother was cared for before he died. After Sister Grace left, Emmanuel sat alone in his office, surrounded by the certificates and awards that decorated his walls. Pastor of the Year 2018, Distinguished Minister of the Gospel, Church Growth Excellence Award. Each one represented hours of work, sacrifice, and dedication to building his ministry. His phone, which he had turned back on, buzzed with a new message from Dr. Adeleye. Pastor Emmanuel, your mother's condition has worsened. She's been asking for you continuously. As your doctor, I must tell you, time is very short. Please come if you want to see her again. Emmanuel stared at the message until the words blurred together. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Prophet Isaiah walked into his office, his presence filling the small office like a force of nature. Emmanuel, my brother, I can see you are troubled. What is weighing on your heart? Emmanuel hesitated, then told him everything. The calls, the messages, his mother's condition. Prophet Isaiah listened intently, then placed a firm hand on Emmanuel's shoulder. My son, this is a test. When Elisha was called, he didn't even go back to kiss his parents goodbye. When Jesus called his disciples, they left their nets immediately. Your mother raised you for this moment to serve God without reservation. But she's dying, Emmanuel whispered. We're all dying, he replied firmly. But the work of God is eternal. Your mother would want you to choose God's work over her bedside. I am sure of it. Emmanuel wanted to believe it. It would make everything so much simpler. But as the prophet left, he heard another voice, quieter, but more insistent. It sounded like Emmanuel's mother's voice from years ago. God is love, my son, and love always finds a way to care for family. The closing service began at 6 p.m., and Victory Chapel had never been fuller. People stood in the aisles, sat on the floor, and pressed against the walls. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Emmanuel took the stage to thunderous applause, but his heart was somewhere else entirely. In a hospital room 300 kilometers away where his mother lay fighting for her life. As he opened his Bible to read the scripture for his sermon, when God calls, will you answer? His phone vibrated with another call from patients. This time, he answered. Emmanuel. Patient whispered, her voice barely audible over the background noise of medical equipment. She is asking for you. She keeps saying your name. The doctor says, he says, this might be her last night. Emmanuel looked out at the sea of faces before him, all waiting for a word from God. These people had traveled from far and wide, spent their hard-earned money on transportation and accommodation, all to hear him preach. I'm in the middle of service, Patience. I can't. Emmanuel, listen to me. Patience's voice was desperate now. She opened her eyes a few minutes ago and she spoke clearly for the first time since yesterday. Do you know what she said? Emmanuel's throat felt dry. What? She said, tell my son that love is not just a word, it's a choice we make every day. Emmanuel, she knows you are choosing the church over her, and she's not angry. She's heartbroken. The words hit Emmanuel like a physical blow. The congregation began to sing the opening hymn, their voices rising to the rafters, but all he could hear was the beeping of machines and his sister's quiet sobs. Patience, I'll be there tomorrow morning. Early. The service will end tomorrow morning.
Patience's voice broke completely. Emmanuel, there might not be a tomorrow morning for her. Please, she just wants to see your face one more time. She wants to give you her blessing before. The line went quiet. Before what? Emmanuel asked, though he already knew. Before she dies, Emmanuel. Before she dies. Emmanuel looked out at the congregation again. Prophet Isaiah was watching him from the front row, nodding encouragingly. The church board members sat in their reserved seats, beaming with pride at how full the church was. This was everything he had worked for, everything he had dreamed of. But suddenly, all he could see was his mother's face the day he left for Lagos. How she had stood in the doorway of their small house, waving until his bus disappeared around the corner. How she had packed extra food for him, worried he wouldn't eat well in the big city. How she had pressed money into his hands, money she had saved by skipping meals so he could take a taxi instead of walking to the bus station. Patience, Emmanuel whispered into the phone, his voice cracking. Tell Mama I'm coming. Tell her I'm coming. The congregation had finished singing and was looking at him expectantly. Prophet Isaiah raised his eyebrows, waiting for Emmanuel to begin his sermon. Instead, Emmanuel walked to the microphone with heavy steps, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. My beloved congregation, he began, his voice trembling. Tonight, I must make the hardest choice of my life.
My mother is dying, Emmanuel announced to the shocked congregation, his voice breaking with emotion. And I have spent the last 24 hours convincing myself that God's work was more important than being by her side. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people looked confused, others sympathetic. Prophet Isaiah stood up from his seat, his face showing clear disapproval. But I was wrong, Emmanuel continued, tears streaming down his cheeks. God is love. And love means showing up for the people who matter most, especially when they need us the most. He looked directly at Prophet Isaiah. Sir, I respect you greatly, but I cannot stay for this service. My mother needs me, and I should have left the moment I got that first call. The prophet stepped forward, his voice stern but controlled. Emmanuel, think about what you are doing. You are choosing the temporary over the eternal. Your mother would want, with all due respect, sir, my mother taught me that love is not just a word we preach about. It's a choice we make every day. And today, I choose love. Emmanuel handed the microphone to Elder Johnson and rushed toward the exit. Behind him, he could hear the congregation erupting in whispers and murmurs. Some called his name, asking him to reconsider. Others began to pray. But Emmanuel did not stop. He ran to his small apartment, threw some clothes into a bag and grabbed his car keys. His old Toyota Camry, a gift from the church when he first became pastor, had never seemed so precious. The journey from Lagos to Osogbo usually took 4 hours, but Emmanuel drove like his life depended on it, because his mother's life did. He prayed aloud as he drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. God, please let me make it in time. Please don't let her go before I get there. I know I made the wrong choice, but please give me a chance to make it right. The highway was busy with evening traffic, trucks carrying goods between cities, buses filled with travelers, and motorcycles weaving dangerously between vehicles. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow-moving vehicle felt like a deliberate obstacle. As he drove through small towns and villages, Emmanuel's mind raced through memories of his mother. How she used to wake up at 4 a.m. to prepare food for the market. How she would save the best pieces of meat for him whenever she cooked. How she cried with joy the day he graduated from seminary. He remembered the last conversation they had, just 2 weeks ago. She had called to tell him about the new paint job she had given to their old family house. Emmanuel, I used the money you sent last month to paint the walls yellow, Your favorite color when you were a boy. When you come home for Christmas, you will see how beautiful it looks. He had promised to come home for Christmas, but Christmas was still 2 months away. And now, his phone rang. It was Tunde, his brother. Emmanuel, where are you? I'm on the highway, about 2 hours away. How is she? Tunde's silence spoke louder than words. Tunde, how is she? Emmanuel repeated, his voice rising. She's holding on, brother, but it's getting difficult. The doctor says her organs are starting to shut down. But Emmanuel, what? She keeps asking for you. Every few minutes she whispers your name. It's like she's fighting to stay alive until you get here. Emmanuel pressed harder on the accelerator, his eyes blurred with tears. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her I chose her. Tell her I chose love. The countryside rushed past in the darkness. Small villages with their flickering lights, farmlands where the day's harvest was complete, and the silhouettes of trees against the starlit sky. This was the same route he had taken 2 years ago when he left home to pursue his dreams in Lagos. Then, he had been full of ambition and plans for building a great ministry. Now, all he wanted was to see his mother's face one more time. As he entered the outskirts of Osogbo, his phone buzzed with a text from patients. Hurry, Emmanuel. Please hurry. Emmanuel burst through the doors of Osogbo General Hospital at 11:47 p.m., his shirt soaked with sweat and his heart pounding like a drum. The smell of disinfectant and medicine filled his nostrils as he ran down the corridor, his footsteps echoing off the tiled floors. Room 23B. That's what patients had told him. But as he approached the room, he saw them. Patients, Tunde, his older sister, Fumi, and Dr. Adedaye, all standing in the hallway. Their faces told him everything he needed to know. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, 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 I made it. I'm here. Patience looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen from crying. Emmanuel. Where is she? Emmanuel demanded, pushing past them toward the door. I need to see her. She was waiting for me. Dr. Adedaye, a kind man in his 60s who had delivered Emmanuel as a baby, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Emmanuel, I'm sorry. She passed 20 minutes ago. The words hit Emmanuel like a physical blow. His legs gave way and he collapsed against the hospital wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the cold floor. 20 minutes? He whispered, I missed her by 20 minutes. She fought so hard, Fumi said, through her tears. Even when her breathing became difficult, she kept asking for you. She kept saying your name. Emmanuel buried his face in his hands. What were her last words? Please tell me her last words. Patience knelt beside him, her voice barely audible. She said, tell Emmanuel that she understands. Tell him that love is a choice and she hopes he learns to choose it every day. Emmanuel's sobbed echoed through the hospital corridor. Other families, dealing with their own crises, looked on with sympathy and understanding. Death and grief were universal languages that needed no translation. Dr. Adedaye sat down beside Emmanuel on the floor, ignoring the propriety of his position. Emmanuel, your mother spoke about you constantly, you know. Every time she came for her checkups, she would show me pictures on her phone. She was so proud of your ministry. But I wasn't here. When she needed me most, I wasn't here. I chose a church service over my own mother. Emmanuel, Tunde said firmly, Mama knew you were building something important. She understood your dedication. Did she? Emmanuel looked up at his brother. Then why did she keep asking for me? Why did she fight to stay alive until I got here? She needed me, and I failed her. The family sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in their own grief and memories. Hospital staff moved quietly around them, respectful of their mourning. Finally, Emmanuel stood up and walked into room 23B.
His mother lay there, peaceful now, her face free from the pain and struggle of her final hours. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but there was a serene expression on her face. Emmanuel took her cold hand in his and whispered, "Mama, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I thought I was serving God, but I forgot that you taught me God is love. I forgot that love means showing up." Over the following days, as they prepared for the funeral, Emmanuel learned more about his mother's final weeks. The neighbors told him how she had been preparing for Christmas, buying fabric to sew new clothes for her children and grandchildren. She had been planning a special meal for when Emmanuel came home. The village pastor, a humble man who had known Mama Comfort for 30 years, told Emmanuel about her prayers. He said, every Friday, she would kneel right there in the front pew and pray for hours. Most of her prayers were for you, Emmanuel. She asked God to use you mightily, but she also prayed that you would never forget where you came from. The funeral was simple but powerful. The entire village came out to honor a woman who had touched so many lives through her kindness, generosity, and faith. Emmanuel preached the eulogy, his voice strong despite his broken heart. "My mother taught me that God is love, but I got so caught up in trying to serve God that I forgot to love the way she loved, sacrificially, unconditionally, and with presence, not just words." After the burial, Emmanuel made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He resigned from Victory Chapel and returned to Oshogbo permanently. He took over the small village church where his mother had worshipped, a humble building that could barely hold 200 people. No television cameras, no international conferences, no revival meetings that lasted for days, but every Friday, Emmanuel would kneel in the same spot where his mother used to pray, and every Sunday he would preach with a new understanding of what it means to serve God, not through grand gestures and impressive services, but through love, presence, and the small acts of devotion that touch one life at a time. 6 months after his mother's death, Emmanuel received a letter from Prophet Isaiah, inviting him to speak at a major conference in Abuja. The prophet wrote, "Emmanuel, you made a mistake that night at the revival, but perhaps God can use even your mistakes for his glory." Emmanuel read the letter once and put it aside. He had learnt that glory looks different when viewed through the lens of love. Real glory wasn't in the applause of strangers, but in being present for the people who mattered most when they needed him most. Every evening, he would visit his mother's grave and tell her about his day. He would share the small victories, the sick person who was healed, the marriage that was restored, the young person who found hope. These stories weren't spectacular enough for conferences or television, but they were enough for a son who had finally learned what his mother had been trying to teach him all along. Love is not just a word we preach, it's a choice we make every day. The greatest tragedy is not in dying, but in living with the regret of choosing ambition over love, success over presence, and the applause of strangers over the hearts of those who matter most. A story reminds us that our loved ones won't be here forever. Don't let ambition blind you to what truly matters. If this tale touched your heart and made you think about your own choices, please subscribe to our channel and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the most important sermon we can preach is simply showing up when it matters most. In the end, we will not remember the revivals that made us famous, but the moments we chose love over everything else. Choose wisely, for time is a gift that can never be returned.